Part 16. Unrehearsed creepypasta narration. This story is called When we were 18, my friends and I played the staircase game. I didn't think any of us would get out alive. One Saturday night, when we were young and bored and felt invincible, my friends and I decided to play the staircasegame. To play this game, you need a black staircase and at least 3 people. To win this game, you have to finish walking down all 5 staircases. There are only 4 rules. Once you start to play the game, you can't quit. 2. You have to walk down the stairs backwards. While you are on the staircase, you are not allowed to talk to anyone. While you're walking down the staircase, never, ever let go of your travel companion's hands. Simple, right? We sought those too. My best friend Margot was the one who ultimately convinced us to play. Left to our own devices, Jonathan and I would have spent our entire summer in front of the TV, content to stay there until our respective college orientations started. As Margot put it, you would have just rewatched the same boring shows, played the same boring board games, and gossiped about the same boring people. Margot was the kind of person who was going places. She had her whole life mapped out, from her college major to her 10-year career goals. Frankly, she was a terrifying force in nature. For example, when we were 12 years old and still naively believed in Santa Claus, the Easter Bunny, and the Tooth Fairy, our parents took us to the mall Santa. Margot argued with Santa for 15 minutes straight about why the nice and naughty lists were unfair and didn't account for nuance. Cowed and beaten, he finally told her that he would take her feedback into account and create the neutral list. Margot and I had been best friends for nearly all of our lives. To anyone else looking from the outside, our friendship was impossible. Margot was brilliant, passionate, and outspoken. She took so many AP classes. She set a new record at our school, and she always knew exactly what she wanted to do and how to do it. In comparison to her, I meandered through life in a perpetual daze, standing next to Margot. I was so quiet that people sometimes forgot I existed. My parents would gaze at us and shake their heads in puzzlement. Well, they do say that opposites attract. My dad once said weakly at the end of the day. It didn't matter what other people thought. Our friendship rested on the solid bedrock that was our mutual love for all things horror and paranormal. We exchanged online scary stories late at night. Instead of sleeping, watched new horror movies and TV shows together constantly, and frequented paranormal discussion forums in between our classes. Instead of clashing, we evened each other out. I'd never thought it would be possible for anyone to come between us. Which brings me to Jonathan. He transferred to our high school at the start of our senior year, a time when most friendships had already weathered countless adolescent storms and were set in stone. Everyone noticed him because he was tall, dark, and handsome, but he seemed arrogant and aloof. Instead of approaching anyone, he kept to himself and read books during lunchtime. One day, we accidentally bumped into one another, sending his books flying. Stephen King, Paul Tremblay, Stephen Graham Jones, and Sylvia Moreno Garcia. While I helped him pack them up, I asked him what his favorite Stephen King book was, and just like that we became friends. It turned out he wasn't arrogant at all, just incredibly shy. His friendship was the missing puzzle piece that completed Margot's and mine. His dry humor and dark jokes fit right in, and of course he was wildly in love with Margot. How do I know that? Because she's drop-dead gorgeous. She had long brunette hair that she often tied to a French braid, and dark gray eyes. I saw the way his face lit up, and the glances he sent her way. Jonathan's voice interrupted my thoughts. Are we really going to do this? It'd be so much less work to just lie on the couch all day. He brushed a hand through his dark curls. And gave us all that lopsided grin of his, the one that made my stomach do a flip. Margot had led us to the pantry in her enormous house, shelves grown with the weight of cans, jars, rice and pasta, and other food items stacked all the way up to the ceiling. If there was ever an earthquake, whoever stood in here would be buried alive under all that food. Of course we are, said Margot, and then she softened, looking at us pleadingly. Guys, I want an adventure. You know my parents. If they had their way, they'd bundle me up in bubble wrap and lock me in a safe. Sadly, she was right. Mr. and Mrs. Auden were fiercely protective of Margot. We suspected that protectiveness stemmed from her sister's death. Marianne drowned in their pool while Mr. Auden was on a business call. They hadn't found her body until it was too late. Margot had only been 3 years old at the time, Marianne 5, so Margot didn't remember much about her. I wondered sometimes whether Margot tried so hard to be the best at everything because she wanted to make up for the fact that her sister never got to do anything. She led 2 lives, the life she wanted and the life her sister should have had. I know it's silly. Everyone else who's celebrating the end of our senior year is going on road trips or traveling abroad. All my parents are letting me do is sit on the couch. I can't even attend a pool party. She took a deep breath, her eyes shining with tears. I want to do this, and it would mean a lot to me if we did it together. Even if nothing happens, I want to know. Aren't you a little curious? Yes, of course I am, I said as I hugged her. Jonathan came over too, and so we were, all in one, in other's arms, for a few seconds. Truth, I was curious about the staircase game. The first time I had ever seen someone mention it was back in the late 2000s. The post had been taken down, but not before Margaret and I agreed that it sounded intriguing. A handful of other posts on those paranormal discussion forums. We loved so much detailed users' experiences with the game. According to those posts, each of the 5 staircases would be 100 steps. The posts advised us to count the steps to make sure we were on the right staircase, because sometimes the game tried to trick you. Additionally, every staircase would be a different color. The first one was always black, then the rest of the staircase would be red, gray, blue, and white, in any order. Each staircase supposedly took you to a different dimension. Strangely, none of the posts described what happened after you went down the first staircase. All of them did agree on one thing, though. We should bring flashlights, food, and water with us. So we were in the pantry. Sounds like a terrible game. You might be wondering why we took the game so seriously. As I've said, Margot and I loved scary things. Together we tried nearly all the weird shit you've read online. We trespassed on abandoned asylums, visited haunted houses, slept at cemeteries overnight, but our specialty, what we did the most in our free time, was playing supernatural games We played the elevator game, light as a feather, Sujara, the corner game, the Darumasan, and more. We had never been able to play the staircase game before because it had been just the two of us. Over the past few years, as we dabbled in these games, my belief in the paranormal had faded to a pale imitation of what it once was, like a fire slowly dying out in embers. Nothing had ever happened to us, not once. I wasn't sure if Margot still believed in the paranormal either. Still, it was a fun hobby. This would be Jonathan's first time doing anything like this. Senior year had been too busy for Margot and me to get up to our normal shenanigans. SAT prep classes, the SATs, college applications, homecoming preparations, and the time-honored tradition of playing a senior prank had occupied all of our free time. I tried not to think about the fact that Margot and Jonathan would both be at Stanford in the fall. Margot majoring in economics, and Jonathan in biology. Margot had considered going to Yale, until her parents made noises about moving to New Haven with her. Meanwhile, the only place that accepted me was our local community college. Don't get me wrong, I'm not against attending community college, just this specific one. Everyone in our high school, and I do mean everyone, joked about how bad it was. I still hadn't told my friends where I was going. The disappointment on my parents' faces was bad enough. I said, if we're doing this, let's get started. Maybe we'll be back in time to check out the new Korean show trending on Netflix. Okay, said Margot. With one foot, she shoved the heavy, black backpack with all her supplies toward Jonathan, who picked it up as if it weighed nothing. Let's head over to the basement stairs. A few years ago, someone had slopped black paint all over the basement stairs. Okay, I admit it. That someone was Margot and I, back when we first heard you needed a black staircase to play the staircase games. Our parents had been furious. We stood on the basement stairs gazing down in the darkness. Personally, I wasn't a fan of the dark. The basements have always seemed creepy to me. I knew it was a childish fear, the kind you're supposed to outgrow, but that didn't really help. It just made me feel stupid for having a nightlight in my bedroom. Well, said Margot, it's now or never. She held out her hands to mine. Wait, said Jonathan, suddenly serious. If the game is real, then should I walk down first in front of you guys? Just as I was about to tell Jonathan that the staircase game probably wasn't real, I saw the vulnerability on Margot's face. That expression answered my question as to whether or not Margot still believed in the paranormal. Unlike me, she had more to lose if it didn't actually exist. Why do over 4 in 10 Americans believe in the existence of supernatural beings? Because they do exist. Or maybe because we all have cognitive biases. Patrici, paranoia, appareniphenia, confirmation bias. In other words, we make connections in meaningless data or between unrelated events, and we interpret information in a way that confirms our pre-existing beliefs. Of course, I knew why Margot continued to believe in the paranormal. Marianne. It's a human impulse to try to make sense of a senseless tragedy, to dissect it endlessly so that you can figure out exactly what happened and why. If you admit there is no fate, no purpose, or order to anything in the world, then everything bad that has happened to you so far means nothing. The death of a loved one, an abusive relationship, bullying from classmates or colleagues, it's pure chance that you survived. Some people, like Margot, had a hard time coping with that. We linked our hands. Jonathan went first, Margot then myself. Any last words? Jonathan joked. None of us said anything. I didn't know what Margot was thinking. I started down into the darkness with my eyes strained to make out any shapes and movements. "Let's do this," said Margot finally, with her usual certainty. And we walked down the first staircase together. I watched the light from the doorway vanish as the darkness pressed down on us in a matter of seconds. It was so dark that I could no longer see the steps I had already walked past. I kept imagining monsters in the darkness, monsters with gleaming yellow eyes, who waited impatiently for us to descend further down the stairs. My hand sweated in Margot's grip, and I longed to discreetly wipe it off on my shorts. Unfortunately, per the rules of the game, I couldn't let go yet. I took a quick moment, devoutly thankful that it wasn't Jonathan's hand in mine. We walked and walked. It was hard to tell how far we'd gone, especially since walking backwards down the steps disoriented me. Yet I still felt that we should have reached the end of the staircase by now, even though I wasn't familiar with this basement. Common sense said that an object can't be bigger on the inside than it was on the outside, i.e. the TARDIS is a lie. I chanced to glance over my shoulder to see how far we still had to go, and nearly fell over in shock. Instead of darkness I expected to see, there was a bright light below us right where the staircase ended. I swerved almost alarmingly toward what was probably a steep drop. My fingers brushed the air, unable to find the railing that was supposed to be there. I caught my balance at the last second and heard Margot grasp behind me. I had almost brought her down with me, a perfect metaphor for our friendship. The words "I'm sorry" were actually on the tip of my tongue, just as the stupid rules came back to me at the last second. Ugh, instead of saying anything onto the darkness, I simply squeezed Margot's hands in an apology. She squeezed mine back. I began counting the steps we went down. I should have done that from the start, but I hadn't thought the staircase game was real. Even now, I wasn't completely convinced. I don't think anyone would have been, aside from Margot. But maybe I'm wrong about that. Is a longer than normal staircase and a bright light at the end of it enough to shatter years' conviction about the way the world works? But as we drew closer to the light, I did start to believe that the game was real. The light showed us the details of our surroundings, and I could see that we were most definitely not in a basement anymore. I heard our footsteps dropping and dripping water in darkness. I had the impression we were in some giant hollow cave. Air currents brushed my face. Weirdly, I even heard birds chirping. Although why they were awake in the darkness, no idea. By the time the staircase ended, I counted 57 steps. That seemed about right since I hadn't started counting from the beginning. We went through a doorway and stood around blinking in spots from our eyes. The sudden contrast from darkness to bright light, bright sunlight. That didn't make any sense. Yet as my vision cleared, I realized we stood outside in the middle of a vast desert. Shining golden sand surrounding almost everything. The exception was a long black road stretching ahead of us. The road gleamed under the sun like a sleeping obsidian snake. I don't want to fall asleep yet. And set along the road at equidistant intervals from each other, suspended in the air without any visible support, floated the doors. There were doors of all kinds and sizes. They seemed like normal wooden doors, only painted in eye-watering shades of neon pink to a blinding yellow. Some were large enough for a Boeing 747 to fly through, others so tiny none but a mouse could pass. A handful of them were made of the oddest materials, from stone to glass to what seemed like steel. The only thing the doors had in common was their bronze doorknobs. Those attached stone doors looked particularly out of place. I turned to the black road. Sand dunes blocked portions of it from my view. The heat was so intense that the air shimmered. From what I could make out, the road ended in another door. Great. Even though I was afraid and confused, an overwhelmingly anxious part of me, the part that never stopped believing the paranormal, rejoiced. Finally, something had happened to us. Something that couldn't be easily explained away by natural causes. Probably, maybe. "This can't be real," whispered John. He let the backpack drop to his feet and stared around wildly. The blood drained from his face, leaving his dark skin pale. This is impossible. Margot said, "Don't you see?" She was transported with a kind of savage joy. It took me aback because this was the expression you expected to see on some unhinged religious leader's face as he preached to his flock about the end of days. "It's real. The staircase game is real," she laughed wildly. If I had heard that laugh while in the dark, I would have been afraid. "Okay," I said, made uneasy. "It's real." I turned to search behind us for the staircase that had brought us here, and saw nothing but desert. The door to the staircase had disappeared. Jesus fucking Christ, the staircase game was real. "It's gone," said Jonathan, voicing my thoughts. Margot didn't appear to hear us. She strode forward and literally left us in her dust. Jonathan and I stared in confusion, and then we ran after her. I could hear the cans clicking around in Jonathan's backpack. The heat was so intense that I was sweating, even in my tank top and shorts. "Either I just ate the worst pot brownie of my life," Jonathan said, "or I'm having a psychotic break from reality and imagining all of this." I couldn't respond because I had to use all my breath for running. I wasn't used to running on hilly terrain, and the road hurt my feet. I was wearing thin-soled sneakers. I leaned down to examine the road and realized that it wasn't smooth. Black obsidian stones comprised it, similar to a cobblestone road. By the time we finally caught up with Margot, a stitch burned in my side, and I sounded like I was close to death. I felt close to death. "Slow down," I wheezed. I wanted to curl up in the fetal position, but Margot just kept on marching forward, forcing us to match her pace. "We can't," said Margot impatiently. She wasn't looking at us. Australia, "Don't you remember the post by Pharaoh's 7921? No. We only have a certain amount of time per floor. If we aren't quick enough, the next staircase will disappear and we'll be trapped here." Fresh adrenaline shot through my veins as I thought about being trapped in this weird desert. Now that Margot mentioned it, I did remember Pharaoh Post was annoyed at myself for forgetting. He hadn't specified exactly how long we had to find the next staircase, but he had been very clear that we needed to find it as soon as possible. "You don't want to be there after the staircase disappears," he'd written. Margot's urgency instantly made total sense. As we trudged along, passing around the water ball we had brought, I waited for something terrifying to happen, but nothing did. The road was strange, and the differently sized doors kind of creepy, but otherwise, it was just a desert devoid of any other life. Eventually, as incredible as it may sound to you, I became bored. I guess it's true, humans can get used to anything. The heat remained relentless, and I began to daydream about going to a nice, cool, air-conditioned mall. I imagined sitting in the food court directly under a vent, with a giant smoothie in my hands. I was so lost in the daydream that when Jonathan tapped my shoulder, I flinched back as if he had hit me. "Sorry," he said, "but do you hear that?" Actually, yes. Now that I was paying attention, I heard the strangest noise. We glanced back and saw that all the doors behind us rattled and vibrated, as if something was trying to get through them. By then, we were nearly at the road's end, and we could see that the road led to a red wooden door. "Run," said Margot, her calm tone at once with the fear in her eyes. We took off in a sprint. I hardly felt the heat anymore or the stones in the road that jabbed in my feet. What stitch in my side? I was suddenly sure that I could run for hours. It's amazing what fear does. Along the stretch of road we hadn't crossed yet, the doors began to rattle as well. The sound of knocking and meaty thuds filled the air. The doors trembled and shivered as if things on the other side were ramming their way through. The second to last door right next to the red one, that was our destination, began to buckle under the weight of whatever was pushing it. As I watched, it splintered in half. "Go!" I screamed. Margot reached the door first. She slapped at the doorknob, trying to open it, and then rammed the door open with her shoulder. Jonathan pushed his way forward and simply turned the doorknob counterclockwise. We all piled through as it opened, and our hands clutched each other before. Jonathan was first, and I was last. Because I was last, facing the still open door, I saw what broke through the door closest to us. Splinters flew through the air, and the door finally gave way under the tremendous force battering it. I saw them walk toward us as we walked down the staircase. They were beautiful, with shining white skin and hair. No, they were horrifying. Their faces were the faces of praying mantises. They opened their mouths to scream at us, and I saw two sets of jaws, both filled with sharp teeth made for rending and tearing flesh, and too big for their triangular faces. And they were heart-stoppingly lovingly again, with liquid dough-like eyes. I blinked, reeling from all the different images. I looked yet again and saw their corpse-pale bodies with starved to thinness. I could count every single rib. They staggered toward us and held up their hands beseeching. My mind began to boggle under the strain of trying to make sense of them. Their appearances flickered back and forth, lovely to ugly, monstrous to beautiful, over and over again. I somehow knew that if I didn't stop looking at them, I would go insane. But even with that knowledge, I couldn't tear my gaze away. My eyes burned as if the very sight of them was cooking my eyeballs in their sockets. The last thing I saw before the red door slammed shut on us, leaving us in the blessed darkness, was that they had the arms and legs of giant spiders. They lunged at us, and the hooks on those limbs scratched frantically at the closed door. The sound of the angry buzzing faded the further down we walked. All three of us panted raggedly from our flight and the residual terror. We couldn't speak to one another well, not on these steps. I wanted to tell Margot and Jonathan that we had made a terrible mistake in starting the game we couldn't quit. I wanted to say that I worried we wouldn't make it out alive. 4 more staircases to go, I thought. And I was afraid.